Hi, my name is Bronwyn Robertson. I work for Terrain NRM, and I'd like to welcome everybody who's here today listening to this presentation. Before I get started, I'd like to uh, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm presenting from today, the Tabalangi. I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and future, and recognise their care for country over tens of thousands of years. Today I'll provide an overview of a scheme which Terrain has been working on called the Cassowary Credit Scheme, which is a new biodiversity market credit scheme. Just to provide a little bit of background, Terrain was one of two regional NRM partners who worked with government and the private sector to develop the Reef Credit Scheme, a new water quality market scheme for reef catchment areas. Using similar principles, we've designed a new scheme to generate biodiversity credits. Before I start talking about cassowary credits, I'd like to give a little bit of an overview and some context around how cassowary credits fits into the broader regional picture. So we're looking at strategies across the region to increase investment into current projects that we deliver on to support the condition and resilience of wet tropics rainforests. We're supporting the establishment of a regional restoration alliance, which has been instigated by the Wet Tropics Management Authority, and this will help provide a strategic, coordinated and collaborative approach to landscape scale restoration. Cassowary credits is one element that sits within this overarching program. So the concept of a cassowary credit scheme was first discussed 3 years ago. We felt there was an opportunity to design something that would meet the environmental needs of our region, but also something that would provide social and economic returns to regional communities and Indigenous communities. I'd like to acknowledge the Queensland Government's Land Restoration Fund for the funding to support the development of this concept. There's been reasonably limited uptake in the carbon market in the wet tropics region, and that's partly related to the cost of biodiverse rainforest restoration in our region and high land values. We also knew that our region had particular strengths, but also challenges around restoration. So we wanted to make sure that a new scheme would help make the most of those strengths, but also be able to deal with some of the challenges that we dealt with. The Cassowary Credit Scheme has been designed as a standalone biodiversity credit, but with the option to stack with other credits like carbon credits, and it's a voluntary scheme for voluntary investment. Now, before I get too much further into talking about the scheme, I just want to make really clear that while the scheme's called Cassowary Credits, the specific focus isn't on cassowaries. We're certainly not moving cassowaries around the region or releasing them into new areas, and the scheme's not focused on particular cassowary habitat or corridors. Cassowaries are an iconic and unique part of the wet tropics landscape. They're a threatened species in the region, and they've been chosen as a branding and marketing opportunity to differentiate the Cassowary Credit Scheme from other potential market schemes. So the Cassowary Credit Scheme is designed for rainforest restoration and protection, and the cassowaries are simply the branding opportunity that goes with that. So what is a cassowary credit? So in simple terms, it's a quantified amount of improvement in rainforest condition that's achieved using an approved method, and it must be able to be measured, verified and converted to credits. An initial methodology has been prepared, and that's a method for accounting for rainforest condition improvement through restoration of native vegetation. It focuses on reforestation of cleared land, so planting of seedlings or direct seeding. Also included in this methodology are actions that reduce or remove factors that impact the condition of rainforest, so things like controlling invasive weed species. The Cassowary Credit Scheme is one of only very few schemes that have been developed around the world actually to quantify and measure biodiversity in a scientifically rigorous but a practical and achievable way. Just to step back for a short moment to have a talk about why we've gone down the path of a market scheme So we know that investment in biodiversity is desperately needed so that we can start building landscape scale resilience to some of the threats our biodiversity faces. And we also know that traditional funding models like government grants and philanthropic donations are simply not large enough scale to deliver the outcomes that we need. So we've gone down the path of a market approach to generate significant investment from the corporate sector or from other um, government and philanthropic sources as well. So really, really simply, the market concept operates the same as any other market that we're all familiar with on a supply and demand mechanism with some exchange of goods and services. So we're all familiar with the supermarket. Um, we can go in and buy particular products and there's a return, financial return to people who are producing those products. Environmental service markets operate in the exact same way, and they can be designed to meet a whole range of environmental challenges, including water pollution, plastic pollution. Um, they're focused on clean air, clean water, healthy land and vegetation. One of the most well-developed and well-known environmental service markets is the carbon credit market. That's been operating globally and within Australia for some years now. There, there are a key set of underlying principles in the Cassowary Credit Scheme, but also in environmental market schemes in general. And that's really to ensure that what's being delivered is what's being paid for. So it's been really important through the design of the Cassowary Credit Scheme that we build factors around these principles into the rules and requirements of the Cassowary Credit Scheme so that we can make sure that we're delivering outcomes for those people and organisations who are investing in the scheme. So the Cassowary Credit Scheme has gone through a couple of different stages. There was an initial feasibility study completed back in 2019. At the end of that stage, there was a decision made that there was enough potential there to progress on to an extension stage. During that stage, uh, a draft standard and methodology were finalised, and that's the point that we're at now. We're starting to work through some of those stages that we need to progress to get the scheme out and launched in the market. So that includes pilot testing up in the region, some communications and engagement about what the scheme is, building capacity in the region so that we can build understanding, but also be able to deliver those large-scale restoration projects. The scheme will also need to go through a peer review and consultation process, and we need to develop and set up administrative systems. So the scheme will be, in the longer term, administered by an independent secretariat. So I've mentioned already the Cassowary Credit Scheme is a voluntary market-based scheme, and it aims to attract investment in large-scale biodiverse rainforest restoration across the wet tropics. It has three main benefits, and those benefits would flow through to biodiversity, regional communities and First Nations people. So what we didn't want to do is build a scheme that provided those outcomes for biodiversity and natural systems, but weren't good for our local communities. So there are specific rules and requirements built into the guidelines around participation in the scheme that will ensure that benefits do flow through to regional communities and in particular regional Indigenous communities. So the scope of the scheme at the moment, we've done some background work to try to identify how much land could potentially be available, keeping in mind that we don't want to be displacing um, other land uses like agriculture in the region. So we've worked out there's around 50,000 hectares of cleared land that's unsuitable for agriculture in the wet tropics. That might be because it's too steep or the soil type's unsuitable. So initially we'd be looking at piloting the program in the wet tropics region. It would be able to, projects could happen on any land tenure, and there's also the potential that the scheme could be transferred, or at least the concept could be transferred to other regions. Types of projects that would be eligible under the scheme, I mentioned earlier, reforestation on cleared land, so that could include planting of seedlings or direct seeding, or it could include management actions that help improve the condition of rainforest. So things like controlling weed species, and in particular those really invasive pasture grasses in the wet tropics. So from here, there's a few steps that still needed before the scheme can be launched out in the marketplace. And so we are estimating there's still another 1 to 2 years, so be 2023 before we're starting to see projects happening on the ground. So we know that there's quite a lot of work to make sure we get those governance arrangements right initially, and including transitioning to an independent secretariat. So we've got objectivity and transparency in the way the scheme's administered. We need to work through a scientific peer review process to make sure that what we're doing has strong scientific rigor, and can, I guess, build confidence in the market and in people participating in the scheme. There's some work around marketing and communications, including some investor market testing. We need to pilot test some projects on the ground, work through a pricing structure for credits, develop the final finance mechanism, and then we can transition to a fully operational scheme. So it sounds like a lot of work still to come, but it's quite a significant achievement to be at the point where we are, which is having our draft standard and first methodology completed. They're really significant steps in developing a new biodiversity credit scheme for our region. And so we're quite excited to be where we're at, and we're looking forward to those next stages. So if anybody would like further information, there is a link to our website there, and you can certainly contact Terrain NRM for any further information. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you with any questions.